February 19th, 1945 dawned cold and gray over Berlin. But inside a fortified basement beneath the Reich Ministry of Armaments, the temperature felt even more frigid. Major Klaus Hartmann spread the captured American documents across the mahogany table with trembling hands, his breath forming small clouds in the poorly heated room. These weren't ordinary battlefield intelligence reports. These were comprehensive supply and production charts seized from a downed American bomber crew near the Belgian border 3 weeks earlier, and what they revealed would shatter every remaining illusion of German victory. The charts had been authenticated by 6 different intelligence divisions. They were genuine, meticulous records of American industrial output, shipping manifests, and projected production capabilities stretching into 1946 and beyond. Hartmann had served in the Wehrmacht's economic division since 1941, analyzing enemy production capacities, but nothing in his years of service had prepared him for what lay before him now. The numbers seemed impossible, almost fantastical, yet every cross-reference confirmed their accuracy. Colonel Friedrich Weber entered the room, his iron cross glinting under the weak electric light. At 53, Weber represented the old Garda veteran of the Great War, who had witnessed Germany rise from the ashes of Versailles, only to watch it burn again. He removed his cap and moved to the table where Hartmann had organized the documents into distinct categories: aircraft production, ship construction, ammunition manufacturing, and personnel deployment. Well, Weber's voice carried the weight of a man who already knew the answer but needed to hear it spoken aloud. Hartmann pointed to the first chart, his finger tracing the production lines for Liberty ships. The Americans built 2,710 cargo vessels between 1941 and 1944, Herr Colonel. Not over 4 years, over 3 years. They're completing ships faster than we can sink them. His voice cracked slightly. In 1943 alone, they launched 140 vessels per month. Weber's jaw tightened. German U-boat campaigns had achieved remarkable success in the early war years, sending millions of tons to the ocean floor. But those victories had always been measured against estimated replacement rates that now appeared catastrophically underestimated. The Reich's intelligence services had projected American shipbuilding capacity at roughly 1/3 of its actual output. The major continued, moving to aircraft production statistics. Boeing, Douglas, Consolidated. Manufacturers alone produced more than 96,000 aircraft in 1944. He looked up, his eyes hollow. 96,000, sir. Our entire Luftwaffe fielded approximately 40,000 aircraft at peak strength in 1942. They're building in 1 year what took us 5 years to accumulate. According to records later examined by military historians and documented in works such as Richard Overy's Why the Allies Won, German intelligence had consistently underestimated Allied production capacity throughout the war. The captured charts represented perhaps the first completely accurate picture German analysts had seen of American industrial might, and that picture was devastating. Weber pulled out a chair and sat heavily, suddenly appearing much older than his years. Both men understood they weren't merely reviewing statistics, they were staring at Germany's inevitable defeat, spelled out in tons of steel, gallons of fuel, and thousands of aircraft. The question was no longer if Germany could win, but how long the dying would continue. The analysis continued through the night of February 19th and into the 20th, with additional officers summoned to verify Hartmann's calculations. Captain Ernst Zimmermann, an economist conscripted into military service in 1942, arrived at dawn with dark circles under his eyes. He had spent the previous 8 hours cross-referencing the American documents against Germany's own production records, and the comparison left him visibly shaken. "Gentlemen," Zimmermann began, spreading German manufacturing reports alongside the American charts, "I need you to understand something fundamental about what we're seeing here. This isn't simply a matter of the Americans having more factories. They've created an entirely different kind of industrial system." He directed their attention to a document detailing the Willow Run plant in Michigan, built by Ford Motor Company to manufacture B-24 Liberator bombers. The facility measured 3.5 million square feet under one roof, the largest single manufacturing space on Earth. At peak production in 1944, Willow Run completed 1 bomber every 63 minutes. The plant employed 42,000 workers operating around the clock in 3 shifts. Colonel Weber studied the photographs included in the captured materials REL reconnaissance images, showing vast factory complexes sprawling across the American Midwest. How many facilities of this scale do they operate? Hundreds, Herr Colonel Zimmerman replied quietly. The Americans call them arsenal of democracy production centers. Detroit converted virtually its entire automobile industry to military production. Before the war, those factories built 4 million civilian vehicles annually. Now they build tanks, aircraft engines, jeeps, and artillery pieces using the same assembly line principles Henry Ford pioneered for the Model T. Hartman pulled forward a supply logistics chart that particularly troubled him. It detailed the flow of raw materials into American war production, Iran, or from Minnesota. Aluminum from Alcoa smelters, rubber from synthetic plants that hadn't existed 4 years earlier, petroleum from Texas and Oklahoma. The infrastructure supporting this production dwarfed anything Germany had constructed. The Americans aren't rationing gasoline for military production, Hartman observed, his voice flat with disbelief. Their petroleum output is so abundant they can supply both civilian consumption and military operations simultaneously. Our entire Wehrmacht runs on synthetic fuel plants that the Royal Air Force bombs weekly. The captured documents included a section on American agricultural production that Zimmerman found almost more disturbing than the military statistics. While German civilians faced increasingly severe food shortages, American farms produced such surpluses that the United States exported food to Britain, the Soviet Union, and other allies through the Lend-Lease program. American agricultural output in 1944 exceeded 1939 levels despite millions of farm workers joining the military. Weber examined a chart showing American steel production, 90 million tons in 1944, compared to Germany's 30 million tons in the same year. The numbers became even more stark when considering that Germany controlled most of Europe's industrial capacity, including captured French, Belgian, and Czech factories. America, operating from a single continental base, outproduced the entire German sphere by 3-1. They achieved this while maintaining civilian automobile production until 1942, Zimmerman added. Germany mobilized for total war in 1933. The Americans didn't fully convert their economy until Pearl Harbor in December 1941. Yet within 3 years they've surpassed every projection our economists considered possible. The room fell silent as the officers absorbed the implications. The captured supply charts revealed that American war production was still accelerating in early 1945, not declining. New factories were coming online monthly. Training programs produced skilled workers faster than casualties could deplete them. The momentum was entirely in one direction. By noon on February 20th, Hartman had assembled what he grimly termed the personnel comparison, an analysis of American manpower mobilization. It proved even more demoralizing than the production statistics. Lieutenant Maximilian Schneider, a former Berlin University professor of demographics, joined the group to provide context on what the numbers actually meant for Germany's strategic position. The United States entered the war with a population of 133 million, Schneider began, adjusting his spectacles as he reviewed the captured documents. Germany, including Austria and the Sudetenland, had approximately 80 million at the start of hostilities. This alone creates a significant disparity, but the real difference lies in how they've mobilized that population. The American charts detailed a mobilization system that seemed almost incomprehensibly efficient. The United States had drafted 16 million men into military service, while simultaneously increasing industrial production by 50%. German analysts had considered this mathematically impossible. Removing that many workers should have crippled manufacturing capacity. Instead, American output had soared. Women, Zimmerman interjected, pointing to a subsection of the data. American women entered the industrial workforce by the millions. They're operating lathes, welding ship hulls, assembling aircraft jobs we've reserved exclusively for men. Their propaganda even created a cultural icon, Rosie the Riveter, to encourage female war work. By 1944, women constituted nearly 40% of aircraft industry workers. Colonel Weber shook his head slowly. The German leadership had maintained strict traditional gender roles despite mounting labor shortages. Women were expected to focus on childbearing and household management, not factory work. This ideological rigidity meant Germany never accessed roughly half its potential workforce, a handicap the Reich could not afford. The captured documents included training program statistics that astounded the German officers. The United States had constructed vast training facilities that churned out pilots, mechanics, engineers, and technicians at industrial scale. In 1943 alone, American flying schools graduated 65,000 pilots, more than the entire Luftwaffe had trained since 1933. These weren't hastily prepared novices, but thoroughly trained aviators who received 300 hours of flight instruction before entering combat. Schneider highlighted another crucial difference. American forces could rotate experienced personnel out of combat zones for rest and to serve as instructors, spreading their knowledge to new recruits. German forces, stretched thin across multiple fronts, had no such luxury. Veterans fought until they died or became too wounded to continue. The institutional knowledge that made military organizations effective was bleeding away with every casualty. "Look at their logistics personnel," Hartmann said, spreading several pages detailing American supply chain management. "Every combat soldier, they deploy for support personnel, mechanics, drivers, clerks, medical staff, engineers. Our ratio is roughly 1-to-1. They can sustain operations indefinitely because they've built redundancy into every system." The supply charts revealed that American forces in Europe consumed approximately 500 pounds of supplies per soldier per day: gasoline, ammunition, food, medicine, spare parts, and equipment. German forces managed on roughly 100 pounds per day, and that meager supply line was collapsing as the Reich's transportation infrastructure crumbled under Allied bombing. Lieutenant Schneider drew their attention to casualty replacement rates. When an American division suffered heavy losses, it withdrew for refitting with fresh troops and new equipment. Within weeks, it returned to full strength. German divisions, once depleted, simply remained depleted. Wehrmacht rosters showed units operating at 30 to 40% of authorized strength. Filled out with 16-year-old boys and men over 50, the psychological impact of these numbers weighed heavily on the assembled officers. They had all believed in ultimate victory, or at least in the possibility of fighting to a negotiated peace. The captured documents demolished those hopes. Germany faced an enemy that could replace losses indefinitely, that grew stronger with each passing month, while the Reich grew weaker. February 21st brought a new dimension of analysis, as technical specialists examined the American supply chart sections on research, development, and advanced weaponry. Oberstingenieur Heinrich Müller, a brilliant aeronautical engineer who had worked on jet fighter development at Messerschmitt, arrived carrying his own calculations, comparing German and American technological programs. "I need to address a dangerous myth that's circulated through our ranks," Müller announced without preamble. "The belief that German technical superiority will somehow overcome Allied numerical advantages. These documents prove that myth is not only false, it's fatally self-deceptive." He placed beside the American chart specifications for the Me-262, Germany's revolutionary jet fighter. The aircraft represented a genuine technological breakthrough, capable of speeds exceeding 540 miles per hour. Only a handful of Allied pilots had encountered the jets, and those encounters had been devastating. German propaganda celebrated the Me-262 as the wonder weapon that would sweep Allied bombers from the skies. "In January 1945, we produced perhaps 40 operational Me-262s, Müller stated flatly. "Now observe these American documents." He indicated a section detailing PFT-1 Mustang production. North American Aviation alone manufactured more than 15,000 Mustangs. 15,000. While the Mustang is a conventional propeller aircraft, it's arguably the finest fighter in the world. Its range, reliability, and combat capability exceed anything we've fielded in comparable numbers. Zimmerman added technical documentation showing American research into radar, proximity fuses, and fire control systems. The captured charts revealed that the United States had invested billions of dollars into research programs coordinated across universities, private companies, and government laboratories. The Americans had created an innovation infrastructure that dwarfed Germany's efforts. Colonel Weber examined specifications for the B-2 Untold Superfortress, America's newest strategic bomber. The aircraft could carry 20,000 pounds of bombs at 30,000-foot altitudes, well above effective German fighter interception ranges. More disturbing was the production schedule. Boeing would manufacture over 3,000 B-2 Untons by mid-1945. Germany's best heavy bombers, the He-177 and Ru-88, were obsolete by comparison. Hartmann discovered a section of the supply charts that detailed something called the Manhattan Project. Those specific details were heavily redacted and unclear. The documents indicated massive resource allocation to facilities in Tennessee, New Mexico, and Washington state, consuming more electrical power than many medium-sized American cities. Whatever the Americans were developing at these sites, they considered it significant enough to divert substantial resources during a global war. The technical comparison extended to naval technology. American escort carriers produced using Liberty ship construction techniques were entering service at a rate of 6 per month. These small carriers couldn't match fleet carriers in combat power, but they didn't need to. They existed to swarm German U-boats with aircraft, turning the hunter into the hunted. Combined with improved sonar, Hedgehog, anti-submarine mortar, and aircraft-mounted radar, Allied anti-submarine warfare had become devastatingly effective. U-boat losses reached catastrophic levels in 1944, Muller noted grimly. We lost 242 boats, over 30,000 experienced submariners. Admiral Dönitz keeps sending crews to sea in what amounts to suicide missions, because admitting the Battle of the Atlantic is lost would be politically unacceptable. Schneider provided context on American electronics and communications technology. The United States had developed sophisticated radio systems, encrypted communications devices, and early computers used for calculations and code breaking. The famous Enigma machines, once considered unbreakable, had been compromised, though German leadership refused to believe it. Every operational plan transmitted by Enigma potentially reached Allied intelligence within hours. The morning of February 22nd found the analysis group supplemented by strategic planning officers from the Wehrmacht High Command. General Walther Reinhardt, a career officer who had participated in the invasion of France in 1940 and the disastrous Russian campaign, arrived with instructions to assess whether the captured documents suggested any avenue for Germany to achieve favorable peace terms. Reinhardt spread maps of Europe across the table, marking current German positions. The Reich's territorial control had shrunk dramatically since the heady days of 1942. Soviet forces approached Berlin from the east. Anglo-American armies crossed the Rhine from the west. Italy had surrendered. The Balkans were lost. The thousand-year Reich was collapsing after just 12 years. "Show me how these supply charts affect our strategic situation," Reinhardt commanded, his voice carrying the exhaustion of a man who had fought too long with too little. Hartmann began with logistics fundamentals. Every modern military runs on fuel, Herr General. The Americans produce approximately 4.8 million barrels of oil daily. Germany's total petroleum production, including synthetic fuel from coal, is roughly 115,000 barrels daily. We consume approximately 300,000 barrels daily when all fronts are active. The arithmetic is simple and fatal. The captured documents detailed American fuel distribution systems that seemed almost wasteful in their abundance. American tanks, trucks, and aircraft operated without fuel constraints. Pilots trained on real aircraft using real fuel. Units maneuvered freely without calculating fuel consumption. German forces, by contrast, had been immobilized by fuel shortages since the Ardennes offensive in December 1944 consumed the last strategic reserves. Zimmerman highlighted transportation networks. American trains moved millions of tons of supplies monthly using diesel locomotives that ran efficiently and rarely broke down. German railroads, never fully modernized, relied on aging steam engines that required constant maintenance. Allied bombing had destroyed marshalling yards, bridges, and switching stations across the Reich. Even when supplies existed, Moving them to the front had become nearly impossible. The Americans established the Red Ball Express during the advance across France, Zimmerman explained, describing a dedicated truck convoy system that delivered 7,000 tons of supplies daily to frontline units. They operate parallel systems, the White Ball Route, Green Diamond Route, and specialized ammunition convoys. This isn't improvisation, it's systematic logistics planning executed at scale. General Reinhardt studied shipping manifests showing American merchant marine capacity. The captured charts revealed that American and Allied shipping losses, though significant, were being replaced faster than U-boats could sink vessels. The Battle of the Atlantic, once Germany's best hope for strangling Britain, was decisively lost. The strategic implications extended beyond current operations to future possibilities. Even if Germany somehow stabilized the Eastern Front, an increasingly fantastic scenario, and negotiated separate peace with the Soviets, the Western Allies possessed the industrial capacity to continue the war indefinitely. Captured documents projected American production maintaining or increasing current levels through 1946 and into 1947 if necessary. Colonel Weber raised the question that haunted them all. When did we lose this war? When did the outcome become inevitable? Schneider considered carefully before responding. The arithmetic suggests Germany could never win once America entered the war. Pearl Harbor occurred on December 7, 1941. Even if we had captured Moscow that winter, which we didn't, American industrial mobilization would have eventually overwhelmed us. The window for German victory closed in December 1941, though no one recognized it at the time. Hartmann added darker analysis. These charts suggest Germany was probably overmatched even before American entry. Britain, though battered, possessed empire resources we couldn't access, Soviet Union's industrial capacity, particularly its ability to relocate factories beyond the Urals, exceeded our estimates. Adding American production made the disparity absurd. The room fell silent. Everyone understood the implications. Presenting this analysis meant explicitly stating that Germany had lost. Further resistance meant pointless casualties, that the responsible choice was negotiating surrender on the best available terms. In a regime where defeatism was punishable by death, such honesty carried enormous personal risk. Germany cannot win this war, Weber stated clearly. Moreover, Germany could not have won this war, even under optimal circumstances. The industrial disparity is too great. Every day we continue fighting, more Germans die in a cause that is mathematically lost. Speer was silent for a long moment. I have reached similar conclusions through my own analysis, he finally admitted. German war production peaked in July 1944. Since then, we've declined absolutely, despite my ministry's best efforts. Bombing has destroyed critical industries. We lack raw materials. Labor forces are depleted. The comparison to American capacity is, he paused, searching for words, not a comparison at all. It's a revelation of how completely we misjudged our enemy's potential. According to historical accounts, including Speer's controversial post-war memoirs, Inside the Third Reich and corroborating testimony at the Nuremberg trials, Speer did recognize Germany's hopeless situation by early 1945. However, the space between private acknowledgement and public action remained vast in a totalitarian state where dissent meant death. Zimmermann raised the crucial question, "Will you present this analysis to the Führer?" Speer's expression hardened. "Gentlemen, you're asking me to commit suicide. Presenting these findings would be interpreted as defeatist propaganda. I would be arrested, tried, and executed. My family would suffer consequences, and nothing would change. The leadership has moved beyond rational strategic calculation into realms of faith and will. They believe new wonder weapons will arrive, that the alliance between Western powers and Soviets will fracture, that some miracle will grant victory. Facts don't penetrate that belief system. The officers understood they had reached the limits of what institutional action could achieve. The German state had become what Weber termed a Vorstaat, a system where one man's decisions superseded military necessity, economic reality, or strategic logic. Presenting truth to power, assumed power wanted truth. Hitler and his inner circle wanted only affirmation that their course was correct. Hartmann asked a different question. What about local commanders? Can we at least ensure field officers understand the real situation so they don't waste lives on hopeless offensives? Carefully, Speer counseled. You frame it as tactical intelligence, not strategic assessment. Help commanders understand Allied capabilities so they make informed decisions about specific operations, but never explicitly state the larger conclusion that crosses into defeatism. The meeting revealed a tragedy of knowledge without power. Multiple German officials recognized their nation's defeat by early 1945, but the political structure prevented that knowledge from influencing policy. The war would continue, not because continuation served German interests, but because admitting defeat threatened the regime's ideological foundations. Millions more would die: German soldiers, Allied troops, concentration camp prisoners, civilians in a conflict whose outcome was already determined. Weber and his team departed Speer's office understanding their analysis, though accurate, would not alter Germany's course. They had documented the Reich's inevitable defeat in meticulous detail. But documentation changed nothing when power remained concentrated in hands that rejected reality itself. The documents themselves would be rediscovered by Allied intelligence teams in the ruins of Berlin in May 1945. American analysts would be intrigued to learn that German intelligence had obtained such accurate information about U.S. production capabilities, but had been unable or unwilling to act on that knowledge. Through March and into April 1945, Major Klaus Hartmann continued his duties in the Reich Ministry of Armaments. But the captured American supply charts had fundamentally altered his perspective on everything he witnessed. Each new report of German casualties, each optimistic propaganda broadcast, each desperate defensive battle carried the weight of certain knowledge that none of it mattered. Germany had lost, was losing, would continue losing, until the machinery of destruction finally ground to a halt. The psychological burden of knowing proved heavier than Hartmann had anticipated. He watched young soldiers, boys, really, some only 16 years old, marching through Berlin to reinforce crumbling fronts, and saw not warriors defending the homeland, but victims of leadership that valued ideology over lives. The regime had begun conscripting the Volkster, elderly men and teenagers given obsolete rifles and sent to face Soviet tanks. The waste was monstrous. Captain Zimmermann struggled differently with their knowledge. As an economist, he understood that economic forces operated with mechanical inevitability. Markets cleared, resources flowed to their highest value uses. Production systems either functioned efficiently or collapsed. Germany's war economy was collapsing, yet the political system demanded pretense that everything was proceeding according to plan. The contradiction between economic reality and political requirements created a kind of institutional insanity. We're ordering divisions to attack when they have no fuel for their tanks, Zimmermann observed during a late-night conversation in the ministry bunker. We're defending cities with anti-aircraft guns that have no ammunition, We're building aircraft that have no pilots because we have no fuel to train them. The entire structure has become absurd, but we continue because stopping would mean admitting the absurdity. Colonel Weber took a different approach. As a career military officer, he had sworn oaths and accepted duties that didn't evaporate merely because the strategic situation was hopeless. Soldiers fought to protect their comrades, to defend their cities, to fulfill responsibilities accepted when they donned the uniform. Weber focused on the immediate and concrete, helping units withdraw in good order rather than being encircled, routing supplies to where they might save lives, quietly encouraging commanders to avoid pointless attacks. The captured American supply charts remained classified, but their essential message began spreading through unofficial channels as officers who had seen the analysis shared conclusions with trusted colleagues. By April 1945, a substantial portion of the Wehrmacht's professional officer corps privately acknowledged Germany's defeat, though none could say so publicly. This created a strange duality, publicly fighting with determination while privately understanding the fight was lost. German soldiers on the Western Front began surrendering to American and British forces in increasing numbers, preferring captivity to fighting either for a lost cause or falling into Soviet hands. The Eastern Front saw no such mass surrenders. Soviet treatment of German prisoners was notoriously harsh, shaped by Germany's own brutal conduct during the Eastern Campaign. Wehrmacht units in the East fought with desperation born of knowing surrender meant probable death in Soviet camps. Berlin came under direct artillery bombardment on April 16, 1945, as Soviet forces began their final assault on the German capital. Hartmann, Zimmermann, and Weber remained at their posts in the ministry bunker, processing increasingly surreal reports. Units that existed only on paper received orders to counterattack. Non-existent fuel reserves were allocated to imaginary panzer divisions. The gap between official documents and physical reality became absolute. On April 20th, Hitler's 56th birthday, the Führer emerged from his bunker for a final public appearance, decorating young members of the Hitler Youth defending Berlin. Newsreel cameras recorded the event for propaganda purposes that would never be realized. The footage showed an aged, trembling man, physically broken by years of stress and mounting health problems, awarding medals to children sent to fight tanks with handheld anti-tank weapons. Hartmann watched the newsreel footage in the ministry bunker and felt something break inside him. These children, some only 12 or 13 years old, were being sacrificed to prolong a regime that had already destroyed Germany. The captured American supply charts had documented the mechanisms of Germany's defeat. This footage illustrated its moral bankruptcy. General Reinhardt visited the bunker on April 23rd with stunning news. Heinrich Himmler, commander of the SS and one of Hitler's closest associates, had attempted to negotiate Germany's surrender through Swedish intermediaries. The approach had been rebuffed. The Allies would accept only unconditional surrender. But the very attempt signaled complete collapse of leadership unity. Hitler, learning of Himmler's betrayal, flew into a rage and ordered his arrest. "The Reich is devouring itself," Reinhardt observed wearily. "The leadership spends its final energy hunting traitors rather than organizing defense or protecting civilians. We're witnessing not just military defeat but civilizational collapse." Weber and his analytical team understood their work had documented more than production statistics and supply chains. They had captured the moment when reality finally overwhelmed ideology. When mathematics defeated mythology, when industrial capacity proved more decisive than racial theories or heroic will. The captured American supply charts represented truth asserting itself against propaganda. Though that truth came too late to prevent catastrophe. April 30th, 1945 arrived with Soviet forces fighting through Berlin's streets, systematically reducing the city block by block. In the forebunker beneath the Reich Chancellery, Adolf Hitler committed suicide rather than face capture. The man whose decisions had launched Germany into an unwinnable war, whose refusal to acknowledge reality had prolonged suffering long past any rational military purpose, ended his life as Soviet soldiers approached within blocks of his final refuge. For Major Klaus Hartmann, Colonel Friedrich Weber, and the other officers who had analyzed the captured American supply charts, Hitler's death brought not relief, but a peculiar emptiness. The war they had known to be lost since February now approached its formal conclusion, but knowledge had changed nothing. The machinery of destruction had continued operating until it physically could not continue, consuming lives and resources without purpose or meaning beyond its own continuation. May 2nd, 1945, witnessed Berlin's surrender to Soviet forces. Hartmann emerged from the ministry bunker into a city transformed into something resembling medieval ruins. Entire neighborhoods had been reduced to rubble. Bodies lay in streets, civilians picked through debris searching for food or possessions. The proud capital of the Reich, the city Hitler had planned to rebuild as Germania, capital of a 1,000-year empire, was a corpse. German forces continued fighting in isolated pockets in Kurland and Bohemia and Norway, but these were death spasms of an organism that had already expired. General Alfred Jodl signed unconditional surrender documents at Allied headquarters in Reims, France on May 7, 1985. The surrender took effect on May 8th, officially ending the European War. Weber survived to witness the formal surrender, though his health had deteriorated dramatically. Years of stress and the psychological burden of knowing. Germany's defeat while being powerless to prevent continued bloodshed had aged him 20 years and 5 months. He died of a heart attack in July 1945, never having spoken publicly about the captured American supply charts that had revealed the war's inevitable outcome. Captain Ernst Zimmermann survived the war and returned to academic life, eventually becoming a professor of economic history at the University of Munich. He published scholarly articles examining German war production, but never publicly discussed the February 1945 analysis until shortly before his death in 1973. In a final interview, he reflected, "We understood the mathematics of our defeat, but lacked the political power to act on that understanding. In a rational system, accurate intelligence shapes policy. In totalitarian systems, policy shapes acceptable intelligence." Major Klaus Hartmann faced more difficult post-war circumstances. As a Wehrmacht officer who had served through the entire war, he underwent denazification proceedings. He was classified in the lowest category of culpability followers rather than activist, based partially on testimony from colleagues who described his attempts to minimize casualties once he understood the war was lost. He worked as a clerk in various commercial firms through the 1950s and 60s, living quietly until his death in 1981. The captured American supply charts themselves became historical curiosities, preserved in military archives. Researchers examining them decades later would be struck by their accuracy and comprehensiveness. The documents provided an extraordinary window into American industrial capacity at the height of World War II production. More poignantly, they documented the moment when German intelligence achieved clear, accurate understanding of their strategic situation and discovered that understanding changed nothing because the political system could not accommodate truth that contradicted ideological imperatives. Historical scholarship, including works by Richard Overy, Adam Tooze, and others, has confirmed what Hartmann and his colleagues concluded in February 1945. Germany could not have won World War II once the conflict became a test of industrial production capacity. The Reich achieved tactical and operational excellence, but strategic impossibility. Early German victories exploited Allied unpreparedness and superior German tactical doctrine, but once enemies mobilized their economic potential, mathematics replaced tactics as the decisive factor. The story of German analysts studying captured American supply charts and understanding they could never win carries lessons that transcend its specific historical context. It illustrates the danger of leaders who prioritize ideology over reality, who refuse to acknowledge facts that contradict preferred narratives. It demonstrates that accurate intelligence holds value only within political systems willing to act on uncomfortable truths. It shows the tragedy of knowledge without power of individuals who understand catastrophe is unfolding but lack authority to prevent it. For the officers who conducted that February 1945 analysis, their work represented a strange form of service. They documented truths that their government could not accept, preserved evidence that would later help historians understand why Germany lost, and carried the psychological burden of knowing the death surrounding them served no purpose beyond postponing the inevitable. They were witnesses to the moment when ideology collided with industrial reality, and reality, though delayed by months of pointless suffering, ultimately prevailed. The captured American supply charts sit today in military archives, yellowed pages covered with production figures, shipping manifests, and deployment statistics. They represent both American industrial achievement and German analytical capability. More profoundly, they document the moment when the Third Reich's carefully constructed mythology of racial superiority and heroic will confronted the simple arithmetic of steel production, oil refining, and shipbuilding capacity, and the arithmetic one, as arithmetic always does when fantasy finally exhausts itself against fact.